My name is Chuck DeVore. I'm the Vice President of Policy for the Foundation. It is my distinct honor this afternoon to be introducing to you Greg Abbott, our Attorney General. Now, some of you know a little bit about my background. I was a lawmaker in that now benighted state of California. The last governor under which I served had a certain regionalism. You might say he spoke with an accent. His name was Arnold Schwarzenegger. Needless to say, I moved to Texas. So I know firsthand how important a chief executive can be in the course that a state charts. Now, we at the Foundation are lovers of liberty, and we like to say that liberty leads to prosperity. And as conservatives, I think many of us far too often focus on the material aspects of prosperity. And for good reason. You can measure the material well-being of a society. You can measure things like a poverty rate and per capita income and how many people graduate from high school and go to college and how many people can hold down jobs and how many jobs have been created. And to a certain degree, those statistics are influenced by public policy. I mean, we certainly see that when you compare the states one to another. And there are no two states that are more alike in America than California and Texas, at least on the surface. When you look at the natural resources with which they've both been blessed, the border with Mexico, the robust trade with other nations, demographics virtually similar. And yet in one key department, the two states radically diverge, and that is in the realm of public policy, where California taxes its citizens at the state and local level about 42% more of their income than does Texas. And where, according to new U.S. Census Bureau statistics on poverty that take into account cost of living and the value of government services, where California is seen to now have the highest poverty rate in the nation, some 45% more per capita than does Texas. So clearly, something is not working in California and something is working in Texas. And before we depart from this merely materialistic realm where you can count numbers, let's look and see how Texas stacks up in a few departments. Contrary to popular mythology, our student-to-teacher ratio, according to the National Education Association, is actually better than the national average. Further, if you look at bureaucracy, we do pretty good. In fact, we're number 2, but as I've come to learn, having been a new Texan, we don't take well to just being number 2. You see, Indiana actually has the most efficient bureaucracy in the country due to Mitch Daniels' reform. So it seems like there may be some work left to do for someone who might aspire to the highest office in the Lone Star State. Now, Greg Abbott is our Attorney General, and in that job description, he may tell you that what he does is he wakes up in the morning and he sues the federal government. Now, I'm sorry if I stole one of his common lines, and if I did, maybe the Attorney General needs to broaden his speech a bit, because I've heard it a few times now, and I still laugh, and I love it, because we need to be suing the federal government, and we need to be keeping them accountable. As Attorney General, he manages a staff of some 700 attorneys. Now, we have about 5 attorneys in the Foundation, and for the life of me, I can't think of a more nightmarish thing to do than to be the boss of over 700 people with a law license. I just, talk about herding cats. I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Army, and, you give an order in the Army and someone executes it. Can you imagine trying to give an order to an attorney? It's like, okay, so did you really mean, what's the definition of the word is? Now, about 19 years ago, Attorney General Abbott was bestowed a high honor when he had the confidence of then Governor Bush, who appointed him to a vacancy in the state Supreme Court. He was 2 terms on the state Supreme Court, and this is where the liberty aspect comes in. We talked a bit about the material aspects of prosperity, but liberty. What's the chief aim of government? Well, we believe as conservatives that the chief aim of government is to secure our liberties, our God-given rights. Well, the judiciary, as envisioned by our founding fathers, is one of three branches, and a very key branch in that it can determine what is constitutional. Are the laws that pass the legislature and were signed into law by the governor, is it a constitutional law? And that is part of the guardians of liberty that we have in our system, the Supreme Courts, whether at the state or at the federal level. 2 terms as a Supreme Court justice in the state of Texas. And then on to a successful elected career now, having been re-elected to Attorney General and now seeking the high office of Governor of the state of Texas. Texas has uniquely been at the forefront of American success in the last 10 years. But here's the challenge, ladies and gentlemen, and it's a double-barreled challenge. Other states and nations are not standing still. Other states and nations are seeking to become more competitive. They're looking to streamline their bureaucracies and change their tax laws to attract capital and investment. We can't rest on our laurels in the Lone Star State. We need to move forward, and we need to improve our competitiveness and at the same time not lose what makes Texas so special, not only to Texans, not only to Americans, but to much of the rest of the world. And that is the Texan affinity with a love of liberty. And in that regard, as someone seeking to become the chief executive of the most influential state in the nation, I think it is very important that we look for leadership of individuals who understand not just the material aspect of their mission, but also understand the very important mission of preserving and expanding the field of individual liberty in the Lone Star State. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming the Attorney General of the great state of Texas, Greg Abbott.
Thank you very much. Outstanding as always.
Thank you.
We're blessed to have you here.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Chuck, for that incredible introduction. And thank you also for the remarkable policy and intellectual contributions that you've been providing to the great state of Texas ever since you came here. I still think that one of our greatest imports from California to Texas is Chuck DeVore. While I'm thanking, I also want to take a moment to thank all the legislative leaders that I see around the room. I want to thank them for constantly responding to the challenges that Texas faces to ensure that we keep Texas at the vanguard of the United States of America. A big round of applause for all the legislative leaders and their staffs who are with us here today. You know, it dawns on me as I'm beginning my remarks, people are still beginning their desserts, and I hear a little clanging, and I want to ease any apprehension that you may have with a reminder. And that is that my daughter is 16 years old now, and I am accustomed to talking when people aren't listening. So you all go ahead and finish your desserts. But while I'm thanking people, I still want to emphasize the importance of thanking TPPF itself and its powerful membership for providing one of the foremost think tanks in America. And that brings me to a point I want to make. But before I do, I need to cover some ground about something that may have happened in a presentation yesterday by Rick Santorum. I haven't had the chance to see or hear Santorum's comments myself, but I was able to keep up a little bit about what he was saying by following Twitter. By the way, if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can if you plug in @GregAbbott_TX. The reason why it's not just @GregAbbott is because some other person got Greg Abbott before I did, and I have to distinguish myself with the under TX. By the way, the guy who got Greg Abbott, I think he is a soccer coach in Australia, or they call it football down there. I hasten to point that out because when I wake up in the morning, you see these reports about the need to fire Greg Abbott because of the poor decisions he's made. That's the soccer coach, not me, they're talking about. But anyway, I got the impression from reading a tweet or two that Rick Santorum, who is a good friend of mine, was here talking about the importance about when you're talking about conservative ideas, not be too wonkish. And I agree with his comment. We need to talk more in real terms. But I know that Rick Santorum agrees, as do I, that even though when we get up and make presentations we can't talk too wonkish, it doesn't diminish the imperative necessity that we do a good job of cultivating conservative wonks on the conservative ideology platform. And that brings me to this point. Because I was struck a couple of months ago when I read an opinion piece by Paul Krugman that was dated September the 8th. That date is going to have meaning to it, so just remember that the piece came out on September the 8th. Anyway, Krugman, as you know, is the self-anointed thought leader for liberal ideas in the country. And the piece that he penned that appeared on September the 8th was entitled The Wonk Gap. And in it, Krugman chastised Senator and Dr. John Barrasso for claiming that Obamacare was unpopular, unworkable, and unaffordable. Krugman, of course, knew far better, and at that time he extolled all the virtues and values and talked in detail about how great Obamacare was going to be. Krugman went on to argue that condemning Obamacare illustrates the widening wonk gap between the left and right in the country today. And he said it illustrates the lack of policy expertise on anything substantive by conservatives, ranging all the way from health care to budgetary issues. Well, it turns out Krugman was embarrassingly wrong on both accounts, because it was the month after Krugman's piece appeared, when he denunciated Barrasso's critique of Obamacare, that the Obamacare rollout began. And then it faltered, and then it crashed. And the country quickly realized what TPPF and other conservative wonks have long articulated. The Obama health care plan is a disaster. It is wildly unpopular, and it is completely unworkable. Well, Krugman also showed that he doesn't know squat about Texas or about our budgetary process. Texas, in particular, is filled with quality conservative wonks led by organizations like TPPF, who've helped generate the ideas that have elevated Texas to the very pinnacle of the United States of America. Now, you all know the numbers. You talk about the numbers all the time. Texas is #1 in the nation for creating jobs. We've been #1 in the nation for exports for 11 years running. We've been ranked the top state for doing business 9 years in a row. And Forbes recently came out with a list of the top 10 cities in America for job growth for the coming decade, and 7 of those top 10 cities are right here in Texas. The truth is, Texas is exceptional, and there's more than a coincidence that the policies that helped foster this success were developed during the past 25 years that TPPF has been helping to shape the future of the Lone Star State. Brooke, thanks to you and your team for what you've been doing. Now, the truth also is that the big government ideas preached by people like Krugman have been an utter disaster for America. You see it in stories like what happened in Detroit. When I was a kid growing up, Detroit was described at that time in terms that are used to describe cities in Texas today. Detroit was described as one of the fastest growing, most prosperous cities in the country, maybe in the world. Detroit was attracting jobs for employees coming to it from across the country. But after an era of big government imposed upon Detroit and endless spending, Detroit hit a downward spiral and now filed for bankruptcy. We see the effects of big government also today on the backs of our fellow Americans and in stories like my friend Orlando right here in Austin, Texas. Orlando is like so many people over the course of the history of this state and this nation. He and his wife were working in one job, but they longed for something more. They longed to be their own boss. They longed to be entrepreneurs. They longed to create their own business, to be a part of the free enterprise system. And so Orlando and his wife went out and they created their own business, starting only with their own family members as employees. Well, through hard work, through dedication, through inspiration, aspiration, and perspiration, Orlando and his wife were able to grow that business to now a size of 60 employees. They did achieve the American dream. Well, I was visiting with Orlando about this a month or two ago, and he was telling me that now government regulations are beginning to strangle his business. And worst of all, Orlando said that with all the regulations and costs that he is feeling being imposed by laws like Obamacare, he doesn't know if it's even worth it to grow anymore. Government has put a lid on Orlando's aspiration to grow anymore, and that is the greatest cost that we see by government trying to run too much of our lives and too much of our businesses. And that is why I have filed all those lawsuits against the Obama administration. I have used every tool in my legal arsenal to push back against an overreaching federal government that is doing its best to try to crush aspirations and jobs in this country. The count now is up to 33. I've sued the Obama administration 33 times. That includes my lawsuit against Obamacare, my lawsuits against the EPA for trying to impose job-killing regulations that threaten our growing energy sector here in Texas, and lawsuits like the one I filed challenging Dodd-Frank that's crimping the ability of banks to lend money and hurting the ability of job creators to get the loans they need to grow their business. Well, some people ask, why do I file so many lawsuits against the federal government? The answer is that it's for people like Orlando and so many others who just want to start a business, who want to grow a business, who want to achieve their own dreams, only to have a lid put on those dreams by a government that runs too much of their lives and spends too much of their money. Well, the truth is, we don't need Barack Obama's promise zones. We already have promise zones, and they are called entrepreneurs. Amen. Entrepreneurs and free markets have created far more jobs than any government program ever has or ever will. And Texas will continue to be the promise zone, the land of opportunity, because we will maintain our focus on policies that promote real job growth, policies that limit the size of government, that keep taxes low, that ensure our regulations remain smart, and that ensure that we maintain the right to work laws that have helped Texas avoid the disasters of places like Detroit. But all that said, we must never forget that the pathway to more and better jobs often starts with an education that ensures that all students are ready when they graduate from high school to go on to college or go on into one of our high-paying careers right here in Texas. I've been fortunate to have been married to a terrific Latina for 32 years now. My wife has been both a teacher and a principal, and she's the daughter of 2 educators herself. And we have seen firsthand the transformative role that education can play in the lives of children. How education can allow children to achieve things their parents couldn't even dream of. Well, to ensure that promise of education rings true for future generations, we must cultivate quality teachers and principals and then get government off the backs of teachers and let them teach. We must give teachers training, mentoring, support, and encouragement to truly educate rather than forcing them to teach to so many tests. We must move away from a system driven by regulation and bureaucracy to one driven by aspiration and achievement. More importantly, it's time to reset our sights for what we expect out of education in Texas. As I've talked about it earlier, as you all have repeated countlessly, Texas is #1 in the nation for creating jobs. We're #1 in the nation for energy. We're #1 in the nation for exports. The time has come for Texas to set its sights on being #1 in education in the United States of America. I was explaining this to someone a few weeks ago, and afterwards the man came up to me and asked me if maybe I was setting my sights a little bit too high. He said, "What about all of the low-income children in South Texas?" And I said, "Well, it has been done in South Texas." And I went on to explain to him my observations of having visited the Idea Academy in Weslaco. According to the Idea leaders that I spoke to when I was there, the enrollment overall for the Idea Academy is around 10,000 students. So it's not a small slice of students. Most of the students who attended are a minority. About 80% of them are categorized as low income. Some of their students even come from colonias. They are so impoverished. And yet, 99% of these students not only graduate, but they go on to college. And they stay in college at a rate far greater than the national average. I toured this school and I saw firsthand first graders sitting behind computer terminals solving math problems. I heard third graders talk out loud about complex reading assignments. And I saw a genuine enthusiasm by the teachers, by the principal, and by the students. And importantly, they do so much more than just teach subjects. They inculcate in every single thing they do the value of character, the importance of vision. Seeing from the very beginning of when children start elementary school that their pathway is intended to lead to college. When these first graders and second graders, when they walk into the classroom has a label on it for that day. The label for their classroom that day corresponds with one of the universities in this nation. One of the classrooms is named NYU, another is named Harvard, another is named University of Texas, another named Texas A&M, and so on. These kids understand from the very beginning, it's a natural part of their lives, that college is an expectation of their education process. So the school goes about instilling the drive and the grit and the will to achieve lofty goals. The truth of the matter is, this drive to achieve top-ranked status is being done in South Texas, and it can be done in North Texas, East Texas, and West Texas. I've visited so many schools across the state. We're looking at what works and what doesn't. And it's time to choose the very best solutions for our schools, for our students, and for parents. We must instill genuine local control by empowering principals to truly lead their campus, as opposed to being locked into a command and control regime dictated by Austin, Texas. We must unleash the genuine drive that teachers truly have to educate students by getting government mandates off of their backs. And we must empower parents to have a real say in their child's education by allowing them to choose a school based upon the quality of its program, not the zip code assigned to it. I visited with a young Latina mother in Weslaco. She explained how she fretted that her son was falling behind in school because he had fallen behind in reading, even though he was still in the early stages of his elementary school program. So she moved him to the Idea Academy, where his reading jumped an entire grade level. We have the ability to achieve excellence in education for this young Latina mother and for the entire state of Texas. Texas can be number one in education. We should be number one in education, and we will be number one in education in the United States of America. Now, to put all this together, we rightfully bristle in Texas under dictates and mandates from Washington. Many of them are unconstitutional, illegal, and simply don't work. We must apply the same energy to ending the dictates and mandates from Austin, Texas, whether they concern economic issues or education issues. We must embrace the proven promise of freedom, a freedom that free people are far more successful, more prosperous, more industrious, and more apt to sacrifice and risk to the betterment of all. That is what freedom accomplishes. It's the story of Texas. It's also the story of Jay Adair. Jay is one of the countless Texans I have visited with over the past few months. Jay is like so many people in Texas today. He's a former Californian. Jay is the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar international business named Coparts. Coparts used to do business in California. I went to Jay to find out why he moved from California to Texas. He explained that the usual stuff, that taxes were too high, that regulations were strangling his business, and that the unions had hijacked the process so much he just had to leave California. So Jay had his chief financial officer scour the entire country to find the best state to relocate Coparts to. And the CFO came up with 3 states. One was Florida, another was Tennessee, and the other was Texas. Well, after digging deeper into the numbers, Jay and his company realized the best place for Coparts to relocate to was the great state of Texas. So Jay loaded up hundreds of employees, all of whom he swears are true conservatives. And he's hired hundreds more in his Dallas-Fort Worth-based business. But Jay was telling me now that he's been here for a little bit over a year, the most powerful part of the story about moving from California to Texas is something different. It's the fact that he and his wife had lived in California pretty much their whole lives. Their children were born and raised in California. And yeah, they'd heard the mythology about Texas. They'd heard about the Texas legend, all that kind of stuff. But not until they got here did they truly understand what all the Texas talk was about. now that they have lived in Texas for more than a year, they understand that they have access to something that people in California simply don't comprehend. And it's one word, and that word is freedom. Jay said the freedom they have by living in Texas now is worth far more than all the tangible benefits that he and his family and business were able to achieve by moving their business from California to Texas. It is that freedom and the free enterprise behind it that we as Texans must fight for every single day for the future of this state, fighting for the ideas and values of the best people to inhabit this earth, the people of Texas. Thank you all very much. Thank you for what you do to help guide the future of this great state.